I'm going to start with a little bit of an apology because I have a little bit of a backlog. That is to say, there's a number of issues I want to talk about, and I've got distracted with other things. I'm looking at 8 newspapers in front of me, so I'm sort of going through them couple of days. So when it comes to talking about a particular subject, it may be a few days ahead of it, or excuse me, behind it. So apologies for that, but hopefully viewers will see these things as still topical. And what I'm going to talk about here is a landmark case in the UK involving a man who burned a copy of the Quran outside the Turkish embassy or consulate, and it's being used as the focus of debate between free speech for over free speech and secularism, the limits of free speech, the encroachment of would-be blasphemy laws, and all the issues around that. So I'm just going to read out the BBC report. It's not massively long, and then share my own thoughts on this. So bear with me. Let's see. This report's from the BBC, and it is from the 10th of October. A man who was fined for burning a copy of the Quran outside the Turkish consulate in London has won his appeal against his conviction. Hamid Koskun, 51, shouted abusive comments about Islam as he held the flaming book aloft in Rutland Gardens, Knightsbridge, on the 13th of February. In June, he was found guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court of a religiously aggravated public order offence and fined £240. At Southwark Crown Court on Friday, Mr Justice Benetham, that's Bennatham, said that while burning a Quran might be something many Muslims find desperately upsetting and offensive, the right to freedom of expression must include the right to express views that offend, shock or disturb. The judge added, "We live in a liberal democracy. One of the precious rights that affords us is to express our own views and read, hear and consider ideas without the state intervening to stop us doing so. The price we pay for that is having to allow others to exercise the same rights, even if that upsets, offends or shocks us." Turkish-born Mr Koskun said that he had come to England to be able to speak freely about the dangers of radical Islam, and was now reassured that despite many troubling developments, I will now be free to educate the British public about my beliefs. During Mr Koskin's Quran burning protest, a man emerged from a nearby building and slashed at him with a large knife, later telling police he was protecting his religion. The attacker, Musa Kadri, 59, was given a suspended jail sentence last month. I'll come back to that bit because it's significant. Mr Koskin's appeal hearing was attended by Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, who said that while he did not agree with what Mr Koskin had done, he did not believe it was a crime. Campaigners argued that Mr Koskin's conviction was akin to blasphemy laws being reintroduced by the back door inadvertently by our court service. Blasphemy laws were abolished in England and Wales in 2008 and in Scotland in 2021. In June, Mr Koskin was convicted at Westminster Magistrates Court of a religiously aggravated public order offence of using disorderly behaviour within the hearing or sight of a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm or distress motivated by hostility towards members of a religious group, namely followers of Islam, contrary to the Crime and Disorder Act 1998 and Section 5 of the Public Order Act 1986. Convicting him, District Judge John McCarver said that Mr Koskin's conduct had been provocative and taunting and told him, "You have a deep-seated hatred of Islam and its followers." This was the earlier trial hearing. The Free Speech Union said that overturning of the conviction sent a message that anti-religious protests, however offensive to true believers, must be tolerated. Lord Young of Acton, director of the union which helped fund Mr Koskin's legal case, said, "We're delighted. Had the verdict been allowed to stand, it would have sent a message to religious fundamentalists up and down the country that all they need to do to enforce their blasphemy codes is to violently attack the blasphemer, thereby making him or her guilty of having caused public disorder. Instead, the Crown Court has sent the opposite message, that anti-religious protests, however offensive to true believers, must be tolerated." The National Secular Society said the judgment was an important victory for freedom of expression, describing Mr Koskin's protest as a lawful act of political dissent. And I'll put a link to this article. So what we have here is two trials, one in the Magistrates Court and the second in the higher Crown Court. and the guy has been effectively vindicated, or at least his right to free speech has been upheld. Now, I mentioned as part of that I wanted to go back to, it's a fact that he was attacked. Musa Kadri lunged at him with a knife because he claimed he was protecting his religion. And I think the fact that he only got a suspended sentence is highly questionable. I'll go specifically to that, see if it gives us a bit more information. Just read out the first paragraph of that one. There's a link to it in that main article. A Muslim man who attacked someone burning a Quran outside the Turkish consulate in London has been spared jail. Musa Kadri, 59, saw Hamit Koskun setting alight the text and shouted, "I'm going to kill you." That's an explicit threat to someone's life. Before slashing at him with a knife, he later told police he was protecting his religion, Southwark Crown Court heard. Judge Adam Hiddleston handed Kadri a 20-week prison sentence suspended for 18 months, which is really a pretty pathetic sentence. And that report goes on to say Koskun's half Turkish and half Armenian, half Kurdish, and half Armenian. I want to see just the logic of why he only got a suspended sentence. And it says here, Koskun had argued that his criticism was of Islam in general rather than its followers, but District Judge John McCarver said he could not accept this, finding that Koskun's actions were highly provocative and that he was motivated, at least in part, by hatred of Muslims. And then it goes on to talk. I find the fact that violent extremists only got a suspended sentence, that is pretty disgraceful. I should say some more context here. When Koskun was making his protests, he shouted Islam is a religion of terrorism and Quran is burning, I guess to draw attention to it. I'm sure he would have known that he was at risk in doing that. So it was brave in a sense to do that, knowing that this country has an Islamist problem. Now, back to the issues. The suspended sentence, disgraceful. I think threatening someone's life and actually having a weapon on him, he should have definitely got a jail sentence. So, pathetic. The first judge at the Magistrates Court obviously saw different than the second judge at the Crown Court. So here's my take on it. I go with those who welcome the verdict. Because if we go down a line whereby someone can be accused of offending faith, then we are going to see de facto blasphemy laws come in by the back door or even the front door. Now, I personally don't think burning religious books is the best way to go about making your point. I don't think it's particularly constructive. I don't think it's the best way to go about protest. But I am also saying that with the awareness of Mr. Koskun's background, the fact that he is coming from a part of the world where religious fundamentalism runs very, very high. And, he'd be risking his life to do that in Turkey. Or if he's of Kurdish descent, I would imagine that part of the world as well, and any of the Kurdish regions, frankly. So no doubt he would have the viewpoint here in Britain, you should be free to do that. I think of the fact that Christianity often gets mocked. I mean, recently I've been watching the two prominent comedy shows, Father Ted set in the Republic of Ireland and The Vicar of Dibley set in England. Now both shows arguably poke fun at the church, the Catholic Church in the case of Father Ted and the Anglican Church in the case of the Vicar of Dibley. Yet, to the best of my knowledge, there's never been Christian fundamentalists have threatened the producers of those shows. Sometimes when you see religious films depicting the church, you sometimes get protests and sometimes it could get hated. But Islam, I think, does have a fundamental problem with violence. Every religion does, but Islam has a specific problem in the sense that pan-Islamism is exported in a way that violent pan-Islamism is exported in a way that is not necessarily true of the others. You get Southern Baptists perhaps exporting some of those ideas to the African continent. Um, but this pan-Islamist mindset is, the willingness to kill someone. It's something we see almost uniquely within pan-Islamism. Now, there will be some Hindus who are willing to kill over perceived, and indeed we've seen this in India, Muslims, Christians and Sikhs attacked over perceived insults to Hinduism. So by no means am I saying that Islam is unique with religious extremism. So any Muslims watching this, I'm not saying that Islam is the only religion that has extremists, but I am saying that here in Europe and Britain, we simply haven't had a situation of terrorist atrocities carried out in the name of Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism or any other religion except Islam. I do think Islam has a problem of tolerance. Now, the reaction to that from Muslims would be, you're being Islamophobic, you're generalizing Muslims, and I recall a guy actually I know with this, just to cite an anecdote, a Syrian guy I knew. Now, this guy was by no means a fundamentalist hardline Islamist. He was a pretty normal guy, and I thought he was quite, I always got on quite well with him. We were colleagues in a job I had. But I remember one day I was talking about a cartoonist being threatened, and this guy swooped in and sort of he wanted to insist that Islam was a religion of peace, and whilst he condemned violence, he wished I could find a light and see that Islam was a religion of peace. The truth is, too many Muslims are too interested in promoting this narrative rather than being honest about and condemning the extremism in their midst. My message to those Muslims is, you may personally abhor ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all the rest of it. You may even agree that killing someone over blasphemy is extreme. But if you're simultaneously denying that there's a problem, then you're not really helping to ease tensions. All you're doing is increasing mistrust of Islam. I think what moderate Muslims should do, and even that term is politically contentious, but let's say Muslims who do want to integrate and to reject this extremism, firstly, they need to be honest. If I, as a white British guy, have to be honest that we have racism problems in this country and we have a problem with the far right, I think it's reasonable to expect British Muslims to be honest about fundamentalist Islam. I don't think that's unreasonable. There's always this thing about people shouldn't be expected to apologise for their entire demographic, and I agree with that. I mean, I don't think men should have to apologise for rapists, but what we should do as men is acknowledge there are powerful men who have abused their position to exploit and abuse women. We should also acknowledge that this isn't a small problem. But my whole life I've been against generalisation. So getting back specifically to this thing, burning a Quran outside the Turkish embassy, he might well argue actually that by exposing the sort of reactions that he got, i.e. a maniac running at him with a knife, it's kind of proving his point. Now, the guy that ran at him with a knife, I think it's disgraceful he only got a suspended sentence, and it shows the weakness of some judges out there. I do think this country too often is too soft on Islamic fundamentalism. It's a very serious problem. Recently I've been quite vocal about the far right, and I stand by everything I've said. But we should never lose sight of the fact that Islamic extremism is a problem in the United Kingdom. It has killed and injured hundreds if not thousands of people. When you include the injured, thousands. When you look at the London bombings, Manchester, Westminster Bridge, including the injured, it probably goes into the thousands. So this is a very serious problem, and we've seen it across Europe. Indeed, we've seen it across much of the world. Islamic fundamentalism is a problem. Pan-Islamism is a problem. Now, I would never go along with those who say the solution is to ban Islam or collectively punish Muslims. And I would never endorse genuine anti-Muslim hatred. So, for instance, I've heard of cases of people smearing bacon on mosque doors, that sort of thing. I'm not going to go along with that. To me, that's mindless yobbery. It's why would you do that? Why would you deliberately try to incite tensions that way? burning a Quran could be seen as provocative, but my point to the attacker and other Muslims who feel enraged by that is, would it not be better to just challenge him? This is the thing about free speech. In this ruling, his free speech has been protected, but the implication of free speech is that Muslims who don't agree with it, they should also have the freedom to say so. I support their right to say, no, this is offensive, he's going about it the wrong way, and I find that disgusting, appalling, whatever way they want to look at it. But the red line is violence. So, in my opinion, if Muslims wanted to counter-protest peacefully, let's say, for example, they wanted to go on the other side of the road and hold up placards saying, stop Islamophobia, or whatever way they would see it, or stop offending our religion, I would say they have a right to do that. That's also free speech. A big thing that people forget in the free speech argument is it's the right to offend, it's the right to provoke, it's also the right to counter challenge that. But this gets into a lot of areas about taste and provocation and hurt, and a lot of it is about what is objective, what is subjective. Now, I would say that certain stand-up comedians are nothing but playground bullies the way they go about things. I, for example, don't have any time for comedians who rely on the pain of others explicitly. I wouldn't give them the time of day. Does that mean I would go so far as advocating they be censored? No. But I do think there are certain things where common sense needs to be applied. For example, because these sort of things are very important when we're getting into this free speech debate and where we go from here. Let's say there was some big tragedy like a train crash or a terrorist atrocity, or some serial killer that left numerous victims in his wake. And let's say some comedian decided not only to make jokes about it, which some would consider in bad taste, but let's say they made jokes about it and they decided to do it at the very place where that tragedy occurred. Now, I would argue that's going beyond free speech, and that is deliberately going out of your way to hurt people. So I do think that whilst free speech must be defended, those who want to provoke solely for the point of provoking need to be challenged. Getting back to the Quran burning thing, I'm not convinced it's the best way to protest. I know the logic might be, well, by doing this, I'll expose the Islamists and expose how extreme and crazy they are. Okay, but the other point of it, of course, is that it doesn't matter if he was taking a more moderate stance, if he was just saying, in my view, Islam is a religion of terrorism, and he was just talking about it, he would still be attacked. We've seen what happened to Salman Rushdie. We've seen what happened to Samuel Paty, the teacher in France. We've saw a case in West Yorkshire, I've cited this a few times, where a teacher was forced into hiding. We cannot have a situation in this country where religious extremists think that being offended gives them a right to threaten people, to get violent. Their rights are enshrined by the fact that they have a right to counter-protest peacefully, to say we don't agree with that, it's being offensive and it's wrong and it's blasphemous. But they should remember that blasphemy does not exist in this country. In England and Wales it was repealed in 2008, in Scotland in 2021, so it does not exist in Great Britain. I'm not quite sure what the situation in Northern Ireland is, but I'd imagine it isn't. If it is in statute, it would be rarely used. And there's a good reason for this. We don't want to be in the same company as countries like Pakistan, Iran, etc. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I welcome the verdict. I would just say that the whole thing about free speech, it should also include Muslims have every right to say that they don't like it. Sometimes I think with the free speech argument, people think that another person complaining is the same as violating free speech. It's not. So if a Muslim was to complain about this and say it's offensive, they've got every right to do so. What they don't have a right to do is threaten the man's personal safety. They could say, we think he's an idiot, we think he's being appalling. But I would say this, you're showing a lot of insecurity if you're going to gets so upset over one book. I mean, there must be millions of copies of the Quran, if not billions. So if Islam is so strong and powerful and enlightened and all the rest of it, why is it so necessary to resort to violence? You know, is that what the Prophet would? Are you honouring the Prophet by doing that? And if you think you are, do you think that's good PR? I mean, the irony of this, of course, is the guy who attacked him was attacking him because he claimed he was protecting Islam, and yet he was proving the guy's point with the act of violence. I'm a little disgusted that he only got a suspended sentence. That's a disgrace. I'm sure that his defence team would have argued he was provoked into it, but under that logic, gang members could say they were provoked into stabbing someone. I don't think someone should get a free pass on violence just because they can claim to be hurt. No. But again, for me, it's not the best way to go about it. I don't think people should go around burning Qurans. I don't think that's particularly constructive. And the other problem with it is it polarizes moderate Muslims. It's not, you know, he may not have been stoking up in hatred against individual Muslims, but it is the Holy Book of Islam, and it's therefore, you know, it polarizes moderate Muslims because they're then in a position where they don't want to condone violence, but they also don't particularly appreciate their sacred book being, you know, set on fire. So, but I definitely think that any religious dogma should be open to debate and scrutiny. There are definitely some questionable things in the Quran, without question. So that should be open to debate and scrutiny without people getting their lives threatened. Islam has a serious problem with sensitivity. It has a serious problem with violence. That's a reality. I mean, look at what happened a few years ago when President Macron was talking about free speech. You had a large proportion of the Islamic world were basically burning pictures of him. He wasn't even making any direct statements vilifying Islam. He was talking about freedom of expression. And I think that there's another point with this. When non-Muslims go to Islamic countries, you could be damn sure they are obliged to respect the life there and the culture and Islamic dogma. I think Muslims who are coming into Western countries need to remember these are not caliphates. These are not theocracies. If you're living in the United Kingdom or France or the Netherlands or Canada, you're not living in an Islamic state. And you either accept that some people will not like Islam or you leave. That's the way I see it. But having said that, there are far-right elements who are vilifying all Muslims. An example that I would cite is the fact that Hartlepool Mosque was attacked last year, the main mosque in Hartlepool. I don't know if there's more than one actually, but regardless, they had actually raised £25,000 for the Royal British Legion. They'd also provided food to the homeless. I would say they've probably served society a lot more than some of these so-called patriots that attacked them. So I will always condemn anti-Muslim bigotry, and there are examples of severe crimes against humanity perpetrated against Muslims for being Muslims. One of the most glaring is arguably the worst single massacre in modern European history. Well, it's a tie between this and I would say the Mariupol massacre in Ukraine. I'm thinking of Srebrenica in Bosnia, 1995, 30 years ago. 8,000 Muslim men and boys slaughtered. Then, of course, we see the cultural genocide of the Uyghurs in China. And an interesting thing with that, or a poignant thing, is the silence from the Islamic world. So one Quran being burned in London or Paris will ignite fury across the Islamic world. And yet, millions of their fellow Muslims being persecuted by China barely gets a reaction. So there is definitely hypocrisy in the Islamic world. It's the same about criticism of Israel. Now, I've been very critical of Israel. I think Israel deserves criticism. But if you're criticising Israel, yet turning a blind eye to what Arab dictators are doing to their own people, or indeed what China is doing to the Uyghurs, why the lack of consistency? Right, I'll wrap this up, but it's a landmark case. I think it's the right verdict. Because if he had been found guilty of a religiously aggravated public order offence, it would effectively put the onus on defendants, and it would lead to a situation where simply talking about Islam in a negative sense could mean that a Muslim says, I'm offended, I'm going to go to the police, and it will be blasphemy by the back door. So I am pleased that the verdict is what it is. I would just make the caveat, though, that I don't think it's the most productive way to go about protests, and I also think that with free speech we have to remember that there's two sides. So Muslims have every right to dislike what he's doing, disagree with what he's doing. What they do not have a right to do is to threaten violence against him. That's the red line. And that's why I think the suspended sentence to the assailant who attacked him is a disgrace. Once again shows how some judges have their head in the sand. But Islamic fundamentalism is a threat in this country. Again, this is an area I don't trust Labour on. I think that their efforts to legally define Islamophobia are bound to fail. We don't need this. I think that hate crime legislation is enough to cover actual hate crimes. If a Muslim is attacked in the street because they're a Muslim, if a mosque is vandalised, that sort of thing, it should be tackled. It's wrong, it's appalling, it should be tackled. But we cannot have a situation where Islam itself is above criticism. If you're a practicing Muslim, you might find that offensive. If that's the case, okay, express why you find it offensive peacefully. But if you think there should be violence against that person, or you think it should be illegal, go to Pakistan, go to Iran, go to live under an Islamic theocracy where that is the way of life, not in the West. You either accept that you live in a liberal democracy or you don't. Part of a liberal democracy is people have different opinions, and some of those opinions we don't like. All of us. I mean, frankly, some atheists, some ex-Muslims and so on, they also have to put up with the fact that we have Muslims in the UK who are absolutely free to attend mosque and worship as they see fit. I have come across some ex-Muslims and some atheists who are quite extreme in their views, and they would have Islam completely banned. I think that's wrong. I think that goes too far. So this is about mutual tolerance, actually. Although I don't think the extremism is on the same level. I mean, we're not saying ex-Muslims and atheists going around killing Muslims in the same way. But I'm just saying that the point about liberal democracy is it's for everyone. So Muslims who had a problem with this, fine, express that. Make a YouTube video, peacefully protest. But do not claim that it's okay to threaten the man's life. Debate him, challenge him. But I think it's the right verdict. I welcome it. Let me know your thoughts.